Well, here we are back to Brighty of the Grand Canyon. We are at the next chapter, the lion hunt. Do you see the lion on top of the burrow? As the summer days passed, Brighty became Uncle Jim's steady companion in all his work. By and by, he actually went on lion hunts. One cool, bracing morning in late July, the very air seemed charged with expectancy. A heavy dew had drenched the earth, and the lion's scent promised to be sharp and clean. Everyone was eager to be off, Uncle Jim and his hounds and Brighty and the mules, but most excited of all were the special guests, President Theodore Roosevelt and his tow-headed son, Quentin. They had come all the way from the capital city for Quentin's first cougar hunt. Just as gray dawn gave way to sunrise, the party took off. Brighty alone wore a warning bell, as he was the only animal young and tender enough for lions to attack. "Ah!" the president exclaimed as the company jog-trotted out of Uncle Jim's meadow. "This is the way to live, close to the earth and sky." Then he chuckled, "with a dash of danger to give it spice." There was no need for answer. Everyone was feeling the bigness of the morning, hounds whiffing and carrying their tails well up, pack mules stepping out on a slack rope, and Brighty capering in the dew, as if this were the morning of the world. For a mile or so they wound through the forest toward the canyon rim, and as the trees gave way to thicket, the youngest hound began yipping and running in circles. Quentin cantered up alongside Uncle Jim. "Lion?" "Nope," snorted Uncle Jim. "Rabbit." Then he wheeled his mule, and with Brighty helping, drove the overeager pup back into the pack. Uncle Jim, as he rode, flung little pebbles that struck the earth in a mere inch or so behind the hounds. "Listen, I have a nosebag of little bitty stones," he called Quentin. "One of the youngsters goes kitting off on rabbits and upset the whole pack." With the pebbles to remind them, the hounds settled down to lion business in earnest, their noses lower than ever. They fanned out as they moved through the underbrush, scenting cold trails too old to puzzle out, and they came in again, and they scattered until Brighty was bewildered, not knowing which to tail. It was well toward noon when Old Bones, a blue tick hound, bayed, and the news that he had found fresh lion scent. "Roar, roar, roar, roar." That's what he would have sounded like. "Hear him! Hear him!" Uncle Jim shouted to the pack. With a rush, the others hit the line behind Bones and broke out in full cry. Their voices rang quivering in the air, and the very melody made Brighty's blood quicken. Instantly, he was on his toes, flying with the pack, pounding along the forest duff, dodging tree trunks, jumping fallen logs, galloping along the rim. He could hear Uncle Jim whooping and hollering behind, and the air gone wild with hound music and mules snorting and hooves beating, and under his chin, his own tinkling bell adding to the tumult. Suddenly, in the rim rock ahead, the tawny body of a well-grown lion leaped from a tree and disappeared over the rim into a tangle of scrub oak. The pack was after him, a screaming stream of bodies diving into the cover. Although the brush was heavy in shadow, Brighty, trotting along the rim, could see their tails waving him on. Their cries, too, stirred him with excitement. To him, the hunt meant but one thing: keeping pace with the hounds, or better still, setting pace. He saw ahead a notch in the rim and flew around toward it, and now he was scrambling down the notch through the spiny undergrowth, picking his way carefully. All the while, hounds were coming along toward him, now to outsmart them. Breath snorting in his nostrils, he skidded down the steep red cliffs, almost sitting on his haunches. He landed on a little shelf of rock that ran along the wall several hundred yards. As he minced along this ledge, he was enjoying the three-way race. Mules and men on the rim, hounds lower down thrashing through the cover, and lower still he, Brighty, tip-tupping along, sending little stones spitting into space. Meanwhile, the mountain lion kept to the cover. Gliding through the close-growing oak on thickly padded feet, he ran with stealthy flowing step, and the color of his fur was one with the sand and the shadows. Minutes passed, and more minutes, and just when the scent seemed hottest, the lion shot from cover, up the rock layer parallel to the hounds. For a few yards he dashed forward, then dropped again into the thicket. The hounds, baffled, broke out too, casting themselves in and out of the underbrush, trying to regain the scent. Up on the rim, Uncle Jim cheered lustily, yelling to each by name. You own him, Bones. Go away with him. Hunt him up. Marbler, try on, Possum. Go on. Go on to him. Yonker and Whiff it. His cheering was magic. Old Bones pushed on and hit the line again with a shrill cry. He voiced his find to the rest of the hounds. Brighty had no thought about the fun of the race. He did not see the big cat now heading for a yellow pine in a hollow, now climbing up the trunk like a lineman for a telephone pole. He was conscious only of hound music, wild and shrill, and that he was leading the pack, dancing along his ledge, loose and free, his bell sounding his own excitement and joy. Up in the pine tree, right up in the open sunlight, the lion glanced from side to side. His enemies were closing in. On the rim above, the men with rifles ready, and behind him, panting, the blood-hungry hounds, and far below, the yawning chasm. But near below, his cunning eyes spied a gray creature traveling with the wind, his back a safe landing place. As a fish leaps when it is hooked, so the cougar made one stupendous leap and landed with a thump on the burro's back, and the jar drove Brighty to his knees. Then he was up, bucking in terror as he fled, trying to shake loose his fearsome rider. The ledge was narrowing into the face of a cliff now, and he tried to scrape the lion off before they would both go hurtling into space. He tried again, a desperate bucking and scraping, but the weight was still there, and now the ledge tapering finer and finer, and death riding on his back, and rocky death below, and his blood beating with a powerful urge to live. He wheeled up on his hind legs, and his forelegs went clawing up the bare wall toward the patch of cover. Above him, 3 rifles pointed, and 3 bullets pinged the silence as a mass of fur and fangs and claw went mushrooming into the briar. Almost at once, a lasso whirred through the air, encircling its thrashing prey, and pulled the gray beast to the rim, and the hounds helped yelping behind. Brighty shuddered his coat to make sure he was rid of his burden. Except for the stinging scratches on his neck and shoulders, he found he was not really hurt, so with a happy grunt, he went bounding up to join the mules and the men. The president and Quentin and Uncle Jim, too, made a great fuss over him as if he were a hero come home from the wars. No one could tell whose bullet it was that had hit the lion, but each of the hunters secretly felt sure it was his own. When Uncle Jim saw that the claw marks on Brighty's back were not deep, he busied himself skinning and butchering the cougar, throwing a piece to each of the hounds, and he talked while he worked. Fear instinct, I'm thinking, is what told Brighty to come toward us instead of leaping into the abyss. But now, gentlemen, if he'll pack his skin, then he's a hero sure enough. The president and Quentin stood silent, watching while Uncle Jim used his knife with quick, sure strokes. Then he had loaded the meat on the pack mules. He rolled up the hide and tied it with a thong. "Now, don't you do this if'n you ain't a mind to," he said to Brighty. "If you're frightened of the lion smell, you just skedaddle, and I'll hoist her up on my old mule." Brighty took a whiff of the skin and seemed to know that now it held no danger. He stood transfixed, letting Uncle Jim lace it on his back, while Quentin stroked him and whispered into his ear. The president was mightily impressed. "You're game, Brighty," he exclaimed, looking into the quizzical brown eyes. "You're darn tootin' he is, Mr. President," Uncle Jim agreed. "'Tain't easy to pack your enemy, dead or alive. I can see his heart tapping to double time, and his nose hating the job, but he'll do her." That evening the party made camp in Brighty's grotto at Cliff Springs. Freed of his burden, Brighty hung back at the entrance, standing with the hobbled mules, watching Uncle Jim throw down the bedding and build a fire to cook supper. Then, as no one urged him, he haltingly stepped inside. He went over to his pool, sniffed all around it, and at last drank deep of its fountain freshness. Everyone was in fine appetite, the men and the hounds eating lion steak, which the president pronounced as delicious as venison. Brighty, however, preferred the frioli beans. After supper, the hounds settled around the fire, licking their cuts, while the 2 men and the boys sat in a semicircle facing out across the chasm. Brighty joined them, sitting as one of them. The slanting sun was at work on the opposite wall of the canyon. It looked as if some giant painter over in the south rim had mixed all his reds in a bucket and tipped it over the brink, spilling liquid fire down the rock layers. The spectacle put an awed silence on the men. But as the color dimmed, there was talk of many things. The president confided his dream of making the Grand Canyon a national park, and Uncle Jim told him how fine a thing that would be. Then bad men wouldn't dare hide in the side canyons, for there would be too many visitors nosing about. As the shadow deepened, Uncle Jim began at the very beginning and recited the murder mystery of Old Timer. When the story was done, Quentin leaned forward. "But you've got to find the killer, Uncle Jim. You've got to," and the president's voice rang strong with conviction. "Don't you give up, Jim. In my book, the scales of justice eventually come to balance." The cold night wind was rising now. Uncle Jim had fed the fire, and as the flames lighted the cave, the president took a notebook from his pocket and began writing. "What are you saying, Father?" asked Quentin. "Just a moment, son," he wrote in. When he had finished, the father handed the notebook to the boy, who read aloud in his clear young voice. "The canyon feels warm with a sense of awe. Under the naked sun, every tremendous detail leaps into glory. Yet the change is startling from moment to moment. When clouds sweep the heavens, vast shadows are cast, but so vast is the canyon, they seem mere patches of gray and purple and umber. Dawn and evening twilight are brooding mysterious over the abyss. Night shrouds its immensity, but does not hide it. And to none of the sons of men is it given to tell of the wonder and splendor of the sunrise and sunset in the Grand Canyon of the Colorado." Brighty's ears forked to the sing-song words. They had a nice chime to them, but he hugged Uncle Jim all the same, his eye on the dead tree trunk, remembering. There you go. That was that chapter. More later. Bye.